Chapter 10. Mercy felt a whisper of relief brush across her face. She was confident she could hold off Riley in a real fight long enough for help to arrive, but if he truly went wolf on her, there was a high chance he'd kill her. Unless she cheated. Which, in a fight to the death, she absolutely would. Sometimes it wasn't about strength, it was about intelligence. "Oh," she said, and very deliberately ran the tip of her tongue over her upper lip. Riley sucked in a breath and the wolf was gone between one heartbeat and the next. Using sex to distract me? Whatever works. Oddly enough, much as she liked to piss him off, she didn't like to see Riley hurting. Not over this. He'd gone through hell when Brenna had been abducted. So now she grinned and said, "Plus, I know you're going to be tormented by that image the rest of the day." To her surprise, Riley's lips curved. Just a little. Just enough to make her stomach dive. "So you want to play kitty cat?" "Men." A disdainful snort, but Riley saw the flash of something richer, hotter, far more enticing in those changeable leopard eyes. Good. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Can we get back to work now? An arch question. No one ever talked to him like Mercy. If he hadn't had her all but purring for him only a night ago, he'd have imagined she didn't know how. There's not much more we can do at this stage. He thought over their options. Lucas and Hawk have taken care of getting the word out to our informants, and looks like the Bakers weren't able to give us any other possibilities to investigate. Have the comm lines been tapped? She nodded. Nate organized it. Text note to check all other cell phones and computers in the house. Date'll go through to Dorian automatically. The blonde sentinel was a genius at computers. He'll alert us if anything jumps out. I'll get Brenna to work on the satellite end of things. Mercy knew Snowdancer had full control of at least one satellite, so that made sense. I also tagged some out-of-state packmates while we were back at Tammy's. They're going to go chat with Nash's friends at MIT. Then, until we get a tip about the van, or the scene processing team comes up with something, we wait. Could be the abductors contact us. Mercy made a sound of frustration. I hate waiting. Leopards are good stalkers. The human half of me prefers action. Kicking at the grass, she nodded. Okay, you're right. Are you going to head back to the den or stay down here? He glanced at his watch. It was 4:05. There was a chance something would break today. We might as well go over the new training schedule. I'd rather eat needles. But she started walking back to their vehicle. Why did we think it was a good idea for the cat and wolf juveniles to mix? So the alliance would become stronger. Riley wasn't sure anyone had realized how volatile the combination would be. Leopards and wolves were both predators used to being at the top of the food chain. Add teenage hormones to the pot and you had a recipe for trouble. It needs to be done. Mercy's cell phone rang before she could respond. Yeah. Merce, came Rena's voice. I'm tracking 2 gorgeous men heading to your place. Do I let them go? They've got safe passage, Mercy muttered, rubbing at her temples. She loved her grandmother to pieces, but she was going to strangle her for this. And I don't plan to be home anytime this century. You need to make time because wow. Hot. Beautifully lickably hot. You're welcome to them. Oh no, I think they most definitely want you. Mercy hung up to the sound of the younger woman's laughter, and realized Riley's wolf was in his eyes. Don't go there. She immediately turned down the volume of her phone. Who are they? No one you need to concern yourself about. Shoving the phone into a pocket, she raised an eyebrow. You hungry? Neither of them had eaten since before lunch. It took him a long time to respond, but he finally nodded. Yeah. They ended up parking in front of a fast food place along a small suburban shopping strip. Meat and grease. Yum. She licked her lips, stomach rumbling. I love burgers. It's crowded, was Riley's only comment. You can sit in the car. I'll bring you something after I finish eating. A smirk. It'll be cold and congealed, but hey, wolves have no taste buds anyway, right? He got out and followed her to the restaurant. When he paid for her order, she shrugged and decided that was one battle she didn't care to fight. With predatory changeling men, you had to make some allowances, or you'd give yourself a concussion. They were that bloody hard-headed. And since she still wasn't letting Riley drive, this was a good enough compromise. Not that Riley thought so. His expression was so irritated when they took their seats that the teenagers sitting at the next table, a group of non-predatory changeling kids, gave them wary looks. Relax, she told the kids. He's just grumpy because they didn't have sweet and sour sauce. One of the girls ventured a nervous smile, but the kids went back to their meal. Riley thrust a burger at her. Put that in your mouth. Are you telling me to shut my pie hole? She bit down on her burger and made a low purring sound in the back of her throat. Nice. It came out niche. Riley ate half a burger with one bite, then started on the biscuits they'd both added to their orders. When she stole his fries, he didn't even growl. The cat decided to be nice to him during the meal, given that the food was clearly mellowing him out. She was on her third burger. Hey, she was hungry, and he was on his fourth when the hairs on the back of her neck rose in warning, even as Riley went predator still. Both of them looked very carefully toward the door. A man had come in. A sigh from the way he was dressed and the scent of him. He didn't have the ugly metallic smell of those who had become utterly lost in silence, but the echo of it was there. Tainted, Mercy's leopard growled. The man was tainted. She was moving before she stopped to think, aware of Riley beside her. The man at the door looked around as if confused, then reached into the paper bag in his hand. Mercy kept moving with silent leopard grace, peripherally aware that everyone in the restaurant had gone very, very quiet. Changeling or not, all living beings had a primitive core in their brain that told them when danger neared. The man's hand began to come out of the bag. Now. She didn't know which one of them spoke, but by the time the man's gun cleared his bag, Wolf and Leopard both were moving at lethal speed. They slammed into him and took him straight through the glass doors and onto the pavement outside. He cried out as he crashed onto the cement, pedestrians scattering in a rush of dropped bags and short screams. Glass glittered under the sunlight, but Mercy had eyes only for the gun. "I've got him," Riley said. Letting go of the psi male, she grabbed the weapon and unloaded it with cautious but quick hands. Jesus! It's a machine gun. He could have taken out the entire place. Her heart grew cold as she thought of those innocent kids, the mother she'd seen with the baby carriage, the elderly couple by the door. "Call enforcement," Riley said, ignoring the glass sticking to his skin. "And an ambulance. He's hurt." The would-be shooter was moaning as he lay there, but his eyes were unexpectedly clear. "I don't remember," he whispered. "I don't remember. I called them already," a shaky voice said. Mercy looked up to meet the gaze of the non-predatory girl who'd smiled at her. A bird of some kind, her hair as soft and feathery as her wings would be in changeling form. "Good girl. Can I have your sweatshirt?" Nodding, the girl pulled off the thin sweatshirt to reveal a pink baby tee. "Here." Mercy used the material to cushion the psi male's head. The glass had been safety glass, so it hadn't cut, but they'd hit the pavement hard. The man was bleeding. "I think he's concussed." "Good." A snowdancer lieutenant's flat statement. "That means he's not alert enough to be a problem." He got up, likely to scan the area for any further threats. Mercy wanted to contact Faith, have her get word about this to her father, Counselor Anthony Kyriakis, but she couldn't chance making the call in such a public location. Anthony's rebel sympathies were a well-guarded secret. Then her eye caught that of a woman dressed in goth black, her lips painted midnight blue, her hands half-gloved. But it was the tiny tat on the top of her left index finger that interested Mercy. A little rat. Relieved, she nodded at the woman. An instant later, the human rat, a member of the spy network that had allied to Dark River, took off. She knew word of the near massacre would reach Dark River within seconds. Riley crouched back down. "Rat?" he asked so low that no one else could have heard. She nodded. "Another psi crazy?" As things grew increasingly unstable in the net, more and more cracks had begun to appear in the psi populace itself. "Seems that way." Frown lines marked his forehead. "We wouldn't have to guess if we could question him after he's coherent, but we won't get a shot. Enforcement will take him in, and 10 minutes later, the Psi Council will quietly secure him for rehabilitation." She gritted her teeth. "This is where I wish I had psi powers. Because after the horrific psychic brainwashing of rehab, this man would be lucky to be able to tie his shoelaces." Enforcement sirens sounded right on cue. Since the would-be shooter was psi, neither Dark River nor Snowdancer had any jurisdiction. The cops assumed control of the psi male and, after taking one look at the big-ass gun, gave Mercy and Riley no shit for what they'd done. The enforcement guys, Mercy thought, weren't actually all bad. But the fact was, the Psi Council had so many spies in the organization it leaked like a sieve. "You know how to get in touch with us if you need anything else," she said to the grizzled old cop who'd recorded her statement. "Shouldn't need to," he said, tone easy. "Just patched into the security cameras. Pretty obvious he was about to go whack job on you." "Technical." The officer grinned. "I call him like I see him. There's been a few whack jobs operating last few days. They had a bomb go off in a restaurant in San Diego. And another guy drove this monster truck through a diner wall out in LA. All psi. Casualties." A nod. "But not bad. The bomb only took out the psi. Injured a waitress though, but she's gonna be okay. The weird thing was with the truck. It jammed. almost as if the crazy had second thoughts and braked real hard. It gave folks enough time to leap out of the way. He put a bullet in his brain before anyone could get to him. But if things keep going like this, more people are gonna start dying. Mercy nodded. The senior members of both Dark River and Snowdancer knew that things were shaky in the Signet, but she'd had no idea it had gotten this bad. So we're good to go? Yep. He nodded at the kids huddled behind them. We took their statements already. You driving them home? It was a reasonable assumption, predatory changelings ruled, but with it came responsibility. Yeah. Watching as the crime scene techs began to vacuum up the glass, she realized they weren't going to be able to fit all the kids in the car. Turning to them, she asked for names and locations. 3 lived within walking distance, the other 2 a 10-minute drive away. Right, she said. We'll walk you 3 home then drive you 2. The girl in the pink t-shirt, Jen, bit her lip. We'll be okay. We were, just freaked out. I know. She wrapped an arm around the girl. They were changeling. Touch was how they healed. But I need to see you home safely, or the leopard would go nuts. A nod against her. The girl didn't move away until Mercy squeezed and released her. Riley came up beside Mercy right then, and she explained the plan. He began walking and the boys fell in with him, while the 2 girls chose to stick with Mercy. The girl Mercy hadn't hugged, the one dressed in a tiny miniskirt and belly-bearing top, inched closer until Mercy took the hint and hugged her too. Ahead of them, Riley and the boys had paused, shooting the breeze. She saw him ruffle one kid's hair, pat another on the back, do that fake almost hurting but not quite punching thing guys do with the third. Taking care of them. The girl tucked up against her, Leisha, relaxed and pulled away. You were so fast, she said as they began walking again. Yeah, her friend said, almost jumping up and down in excitement. It was like wow. Totally. Leisha beamed at Mercy. I heard that you were, a sentinel, but I never thought I'd see you in action. The boys sometimes say that like, you're probably not as tough as the men, Jen completed. I'm so going to make them eat their words. Mercy laughed. You have to excuse them. Boys suffer from an incurable disability. What? Testosterone. Both girls cracked up, and Riley turned to give her a look that reminded her of all the things she liked about testosterone, especially when it was packed in the hard, muscled body of a wolf, who seemed ready to devour her in small sex. Chapter 11. Anthony Kariakis dropped out of the telepathic conference and thought about the information he'd just received via his daughter. Today's violence was troubling, but given the time frame of events, it could be put down to an anomalous statistical cluster. The net was normally a seamless river of data, without chaos, without emotion, but with the recent high-profile defections, as well as the activities of various rebel groups, it had begun to fluctuate with waves of uncertainty. And since Psi were connected to the net on the most visceral level, needing the biofeedback to survive, anything that happened there had real-life impact. It even made sense that the violence was occurring in this region. The Psi net wasn't defined by geographical limits, but they'd had a number of disturbances in this area and the psychic effect would be strongest at the point of origin. A big enough surge could have short-circuited some aspect of the conditioning under silence. However, Anthony wasn't convinced. His fellow counselors seemed to be ignoring the events, but the comm panel beeped. Glancing at the ID screen, he saw it was Caleb Krychek, fellow counselor and perhaps the most powerful telekinetic in the net. From what Anthony had unearthed, he knew that Caleb's control over the net mind, the neo-sentient entity that was both the librarian and guardian of the net, was close to complete. It was the very situation the council hadn't wanted after Santano Enrique. The now-dead counselor had used his power over the net mind to hide his murderous crimes. Caleb was much more subtle. He let others believe they held power even as he played them for fools. A very dangerous man, and one whose history was close to opaque, though there were rumors he'd been Enrique's protege. Caleb, he said, answering the call. It must be early in Moscow. Very, Caleb said, but since the visual was blocked on both ends, Anthony knew the other man could be anywhere. It was difficult to tie a teleport-capable TK to one location. But it's your region I'm calling about. I saw the reports. There's been a new incident. The shooter, Caleb said. Data is already flowing in. The others appear to consider these occurrences a statistical anomaly. And you? Anthony leaned back in his seat. I think we need to scan the shooter's mind. He paused as a message came through on his cell phone. Interesting. Henry just sent me a note proposing the same thing, and he's offered to take care of the scan. But what exactly was Henry doing in California? His home was in London. I assume you'll be going with him. Of course. After all, none of the counselors trusted each other. Anthony, as the leader of a rebellion determined to bring a new reigning order to the net, trusted very few people at all. In a room at the San Francisco branch of the center, the shooter lay tied to a table, his entire body restrained. "Please," he said. "Let me go." The MC monitoring his room heard but didn't respond to his plea. Their job was to make sure he stayed alive, and given his violent tendencies, the best way to keep him safe from himself was to make sure he couldn't move. The fact that his mind had been locked in telepathic shields would have been termed inhumane by the other races, but those races had no experience with psychotic telepaths. This man could blow out other people's brains with a burst of pure power. It might liquefy his own brains too, but if he was suicidal that wouldn't matter. So they sat silent and watchful as the man in the bed started to say, I have to. But he never said what he had to do, and they didn't figure it out until it was Chapter 12. Mercy was about to bring her vehicle to a stop a little distance from her cabin when the news bulletin came on. The body of a 29-year-old Tahoe woman was found buried in a shallow grave near the western shore of the lake an hour ago. The grisly find was made by a local resident out for a walk with his dog. Enforcement hasn't yet released a formal statement, but sources close to the investigation tell us the condition of the body suggests she died recently, possibly within the past 48 hours. We'll keep you updated as the story develops. Riley, having decided to ride this far with her, reached forward to turn off the feed. We need to warn our people. Just in case. His tone was even. Too even. Mercy didn't try to talk to him about the pain he held so fiercely to his heart. Knowing she'd get a blank look at best, Brenna's abduction and its aftermath was the one thing Riley simply refused to discuss. It was instinct to want to touch him, to offer comfort, but she knew that right now, he'd accept nothing. So she stuck to the facts. Let's hope it was a one-off. She felt deep sorrow for the murdered woman and her family, but a jealous boyfriend or husband would be quickly caught. Assyriel, on the other hand. No use borrowing trouble. I'll get the word out and have some of our calm people follow the story. Riley nodded as they exited. Leaning back against the hood, she returned to their earlier topic of conversation. I'll call you the second we hear anything about Nash. The groundwork had been laid. The intel would come in, of that Mercy was certain. Trying to hide an adult lynx in a city full of changelings isn't going to be easy, especially with the rats on alert for any sign of the missing male. We can't underestimate them, Riley cautioned. They managed to grab a pissed-off male lynx and get him out pretty efficiently. About to tease him for his caution, she glimpsed something in his hair. Don't move. Reaching up, she removed a square of glass, putting it on the car's hood so it wouldn't litter the forest floor. To double-check, she ran her fingers through the thick weight of his hair. You're tense as a board. His body was so taut it was a wonder he could breathe. No answer. Looking into his eyes, she felt her breath lock. The wolf glimmered amber bright, hungry and edgy and dangerous. What is it this time? She shouldn't have provoked him, but she couldn't help herself. It was like he was catnip. One sniff and she lost her mind. Riley was barely holding back his wolf. The creature wanted him to throw Mercy to the ground, rip off her pants, bite down on her neck and take her. Hard. Fast. Again. And again. Dear God, but the man in him wanted to do exactly the same. Fighting the instinct, he squeezed his hands into fists so tight, his veins threatened to explode. Riley. Mercy scowled, taking a step back. The wolf bared its teeth inside him, but he held on to his humanity. She bled earlier today when her arms had hit the asphalt as they took down the would-be shooter. The wolf had gone insane at the scent. Riley had somehow managed to keep it together this far. He wasn't known for his control for nothing, but now the wolf was clawing at him, determined to get out. And do what? Mercy didn't belong to him. The wolf didn't care. Neither, Riley was surprised to realize, did the man. The possessive, protective thoughts hazed his brain, pushing him closer to the edge than he'd been for a long time. Focus. He closed his eyes and felt her breath against his neck. So tense you're about to snap. Lips brushing his skin, hands on his shoulders. Mercy. Came out a growl. I'm being nice to you. Teeth closing over the pulse in his neck. A gentle reprimand. Accept it gracefully. He squeezed her hip with a hand that had somehow found its way to her body, but remained still. She was being nice to him, using touch to anchor him. It was the changeling way. But he didn't particularly want comforting from Mercy. He thrust his hand into her hair, pulling it out from the rough ponytail. Her hand stroked the side of his neck. Can't help it, can you? A kiss pressed to the hollow of his throat. You're going all wolf on me because I got a little bruised up. He was too startled by her knowledge to answer. Didn't think I saw the way you looked at my hands, did you? Sliding those hands under his t-shirt, she ran her nails gently down his back. Poor guy, blinded by testosterone. Now she was laughing at him. He should have snarled. Instead, he relaxed his hold on her hair so she could more easily claim a kiss. She was the uncontested aggressor this time. He let her taste his mouth, let her lick her tongue over his lip. Cat. She was such a cat. Stroking him with those cat claws, nipping at his lip with feline flirtatiousness. When she broke the kiss to tug at his t-shirt, he cooperated and pulled it over his head. Her lashes dropped to shade the expression in her eyes as she shaped him with her hands, stroking down the planes of his chest. His hand was back in her hair, but he was no longer as wound up, no longer as close to going wolf. Then she pressed an open-mouthed kiss to his chest, and he felt another kind of hunger overtake him. More. It was a raw demand. She laughed softly and leaned into him, tracing circles around one flat nipple. I think you're fine now. More. His hand tightened in her hair. She stroked her own hand down his body, and stopped an inch from the erection, threatening to poke a hole in his jeans. Play nice. Fingers tapped, dancing a quarter of an inch from his straining cock. No, he pulled back her head, baring her neck. Then let go. She held the position, offering him her throat. A gift of trust, because in changeling combat, you could lose your life to jaws clamping over your throat. Relaxing completely, he slid a hand over her nape and kissed his way up the arch of her neck. She tasted of air under his palms, a red-haired cat with her hands on her hips several feet away. He narrowed his eyes. Teasing. You know that wasn't what I was doing. He showed her his teeth. Coward. See if I pet you next time you go all crazy. Good going, Riley. I didn't like seeing you hurt. We've been over this. I'm not your concern. The only reason I'm not spitting at you is because I know you literally can't help it. Then she was gone. Riley shrugged into his t-shirt, his stomach taut with a knowledge he didn't want to consider. She was right, predatory changeling men were protective as a rule. But Riley was his alpha's second. His control over his reactions was legendary. He protected, but he didn't go feral. Not like this. Today he'd become a wolf in human form. A wolf fixated on mercy alone. Wanting to prowl after her but knowing that would be the absolute wrong move with this cat. He was about to leave when he caught two distinct and unfamiliar male scents on the air currents. The wolf exploded to the forefront of his mind. He was at the cabin before he knew it, to find Mercy standing at the foot of the steps that led up to her porch, facing off against two strangers he immediately categorized as threats. The growl that started at the back of his throat turned into cold focus between one instant and the next. His claws sliced out. Chapter 13. At the same instant, Counselors Henry Scott and Anthony Kariakis walked into the observation chamber opposite the would-be shooter's room. Has he said anything? Henry asked. He's been mumbling that he has to do something, the head MC said. But we don't know what. Henry stared through the glass. The mind scan should give us the answer. Anthony knew Henry was the counselor most involved with Pure Psi, the group that had vowed to maintain silence at all costs. He wondered what their reaction would be to these acts of violence, acts that showed the clear disintegration of the protocol. Let's go, he said quietly. As they went to move into the room, they glimpsed an orderly undoing the straps on the patient's arm. Anthony blasted out with a telepathic order to stop, but it was too late. The patient wrenched out his hand, pulled a pen from the orderly's front pocket, and stabbed himself through the ear in the space of a single fractured second. Anthony sensed the MC running toward the bed, but he focused on the man's dying mind, reading what he could before the shock of death petrified everything to stone. He caught the edge of compulsion, knew someone had been pulling this man's strings. He'd been nothing more than a puppet, easily used, easily discarded. It was clear the puppet master had implanted a suggestion that his pawn suicide after the completion of his mission, or if he was caught. Only the fact that the shooter had been stunned at the scene, and then under mental guard, had stopped him from using his telepathy to accomplish the task. Even as the thought passed through Anthony's head, he saw the orderly crumple to the floor, and belatedly realized the man had been laboring under the same compulsion. Who had the access and ability to control this many people? The answer was, a significant number of people in the council superstructure. The real question was why. Chapter 14. Mercy spun around to find Riley amber-eyed and cold in a way that told her he wasn't thinking about anything but blood. Riley. He didn't look at her. Who are they? The two men opposite her had gone hunting quiet at his approach, and now she felt the promise of violence lick the air. Why is this wolf near your home? Eduardo asked, his leopard crawling in the menace of his voice. Quiet, she ordered, turning to the newcomers with furious eyes. He has a right to be here. You're the interloper, so shut it. Eduardo blinked as if he'd never had someone speak to him in that tone. Beside him, Joaquin retracted his claws, but she wasn't fooled. These men were sentinels. They could go attack ready in a split second. But then so could she. Stay here. Stepping away from the porch, she headed toward Riley. He still didn't take his eyes off the men. Snarling, she pushed him in the chest. His head snapped toward her. Who are they? He asked again in that cold wolf voice. Sentinels from my grandmother's pack, she said, livid at all three men, but mostly at Riley. She wasn't a bone to be fought over. He had no right to act territorial. She hadn't given him that right. And I thought I told you to head back. I'm not leaving you alone with strangers. Quiet. Implacable. Her temper rose. We just had this conversation, Riley. He didn't answer, his amber gaze shifting over her shoulder. Why are they here? Mercy's grandmother, Eduardo said from the porch, thought she might have chemistry with one of us. Mercy decided she'd have to shoot Eduardo. That pause had been calculated, the innuendo unmistakable. Damn cat was enjoying this. And she could all but sense Riley's beast pounding against his skin, ready to savage and kill. Out, she said, pointing her finger first at Eduardo, then at Joaquin. You come near my home again without permission. I'll show you exactly why my grandmother calls me her favorite granddaughter. To their credit, neither man turned noticeably green. But they did come down off her porch. I'm not leaving you alone with a wolf. Eduardo again, acting as if he held authority over her. Mercy had it. She moved without warning, spinning her clawed hand out toward the other sentinel's throat. He shifted back, but not fast enough to escape the graze across his throat. As he swore, his friend grinned and said something in Portuguese that he probably thought Mercy couldn't understand. But she'd spent time roaming in their homeland. Now she retracted her claws and said, Joaquin is right. You asked for that one. She raised an eyebrow when they didn't move. Why are you still here? Surprisingly, it was the quiet one who answered. We like the night air. His eyes were on Riley, who'd stepped closer, until only Mercy separated the three men. They weren't going to listen. Fuck. Tempted to leave them to it, she glanced at Riley, saw his rage in the iron-hard line of his jaw, and felt her heart give a jagged beat. He was at the edge of his control after everything that had happened today. If she left him alone with these two, somebody would get seriously damaged. You like the night air? She smiled, sweet as pie. In that case, let's go for a run. Wolf and Leopard both looked at her like she was insane. What? Don't think you can keep up with me? You're probably right. With that, she walked into the forest and took off, hoping the gamble would work. It did. All three followed her, the protectiveness built into their nature winning out over the possessiveness. Not that she needed protecting. Never had. Never would. And the fact that Riley didn't understand that more than irritated her. But in a tiny secret corner, she was surprised to find a hint of pleasure. The wolf saw her as a woman, something men were often too blinded by her status to notice. Too bad Kincaid couldn't compartmentalize. What she'd accept from a lover, she'd never accept from an ally who was supposed to be her partner. Now she took them on one hell of a chase. All were fast. But Riley knew this land like the back of his hand. Quickly outstripping Eduardo and Joaquin, he tracked her to a spot leading away from her house and toward the Sierra. She kept up the run even when he came up beside her. Stop, he said, putting a hand on her arm. She shook it off. If I have to escort you home, then that's what I'll do. A snowdancer lieutenant is not going to be injured on my watch on Dark River land. This isn't about the alliance. The wolf was riding him so hard, she could scarcely understand the words. Yeah, it's about you acting stupid. Mercy, damn it. Stop. Riley swung around to block her path. You're tired and bruised from today. You need to be in a bath. It agitated the wolf that she was tiring herself even further when she should have been resting. She halted, raised an eyebrow. I know that. What do you think I planned to do before you three started pounding your chests? His vision glazed over at the mention of the other men. They're here to make a claim on you. No one can make a claim on me that I don't allow. And if you don't know that by now, there's no point in this conversation. He heard something in that statement, a cool finality that told him he could lose her right this moment. Pulling on every ounce of self-control he had, he reined in the wolf and said, Let me escort you back home. I'll leave straight after. No, a flat refusal, but her eyes were full of fire. I'll get myself home, and if necessary, I'll kick Eduardo and Joaquin's butts. Riley felt the wolf buck at the reins at the mention of those names, but he held on to his humanity. They won't catch you. You move like lightning and this is your territory. Good answer. But she stayed out of reach. Are you going to leave for the den? He wanted to stalk those two unknown leopards, make sure they knew he'd marked her, taken her. But that, he realized, would end any and all chance he had with the woman he wanted more than his next breath. Biting back a growl, he shifted into wolf form and stared at her. She came down on her haunches and touched him at last, an intrinsically female stroke through his fur. Go. Fighting the violent natural urges of man and wolf both, he did as she asked. Mercy knew exactly how much it had cost Riley to do what he'd done. Yet he had. For her. It shattered another barrier inside of her, made her wonder if perhaps they could do this, become lovers, without it destroying the working relationship between them. A relationship that was vital to the Dark River Snowdancer Alliance. They were sentinel and lieutenant, there was no getting away from that. Every one of their actions had the potential to rebound onto their packs. She felt her phone vibrate as she walked in through her back door. Having evaded both Eduardo and Joaquin, the caller ID told her it was her grandmother. Realizing she better not answer it in her current mood, she had a quick meal, then stripped and walked into the shower. The bath would have to wait. She wanted sleep. But her rest was broken. She was worried about Nash. And, if she was honest about her inability to stay away from Riley, she'd been truthful earlier when she told him she was touching him because he needed it. But that wasn't the whole story. She needed it too. Those dark eyes that were too often solemn, that beautiful thick hair, that stubborn male body, it all drew her. Solid, Riley was solid. His abdomen was hard enough to bounce quarters off, his thighs firmly muscled, bitably muscled. But he was in no way slow, though he was very good at pretending to be. As Eduardo and Joaquin had discovered, Riley could move wicked fast when he wanted to. He could also move with leisurely patience when inside a woman. Her entire body sighed, wanting more, wanting him, and only him. But powerful though the attraction was, she could deal. She was a woman at home with her needs, and it wasn't as if he didn't want her back. No, it wasn't the physical stuff that worried her. It was the other things that were beginning to be woven into the physical. Like the tenderness she'd felt today. She should have berated him for going all crazy because she'd gotten a little scratched up, but no, she'd stroked him instead. Because when she'd seen that glint of glass in his hair, her heart had skipped a beat. Irrational worry. But worry. And later, when she should have left him to fight it out with Eduardo and Joaquin, what had she done? She made sure he left without any bloodshed. Part of it she could blame on a sentinel's duties. He was a snowdancer lieutenant, and if he was attacked by guests of Dark River, it would shake the foundations of the alliance. But the rest. In spite of her anger at his unearned possessiveness, she hadn't wanted him hurt. Of course, she thought, kicking off the covers in the mood he'd been in, he'd probably have made mincemeat of the other two. She had to. Sleep finally crept over her in a stealthy wave, her dreams hot and dark. Riley ran himself to exhaustion, but he dreamed too. They weren't good dreams. He was late. Always too late. Willow's broken body lay in a shallow grave, and he couldn't even pick her up, couldn't even hold her close. Her eyes snapped open, but they weren't her eyes. Only one person had such unique eyes, and that's when he saw it was Brenna in that grave being buried alive. Her hands reached for him, but he was locked in place, unable to move as his sister screamed. Until the dirt covered her face, filled in her mouth, stilled her hands. Riley jerked upright with a scream of anguish stuck in his throat. His first instinct was to check that Brenna was okay, but it was 2:30 in the morning, and there was no way he wanted her aware of the demons that continued to haunt him, night after endless night. Shoving back the sweat-damp hair on his forehead, he got up, knowing he wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. Instead, he took a shower and dressed. It didn't take long. There were so many night hours left to go. When he began to head down to the garage, he told himself to stop, but his feet kept moving forward. Grabbing the four-wheel drive closest to the exit, he drove through the pitch black of night in the Sierra and onto Dark River land. Normally he loved the night, the beauty and the peace of it. But tonight the darkness haunted him, reverberating with 1,000 echoes of nightmare. Fighting those insidious whispers, he kept his focus strictly on his destination. And then he'd arrived. Mercy's vehicle was there in its spot. Something in him relaxed. Parking next to it, he exited into a world cloaked in the opaque hush of a moonless night. It was instinct to go to her cabin and sit on the steps. His wolf was still agitated, but here he could think. Blowing out a breath, he decided to simply wait for dawn. For Mercy. That was when the door opened. Riley. Of course she'd known he was there. She was a sentinel. And in some part of his soul he'd counted on that. Don't ask me any questions tonight, Mercy. He didn't look at her, feeling vulnerable in a way that panicked his wolf. All right. Soft footsteps. But would you like to come inside? Wary of her agreement but needing something, he walked in. She took his hand, her golden eyes luminous in the dark. Come on, Wolf. He let her lead him to the bedroom. Boots off, she said, and crawled beneath the blanket. Sitting on a chair near the vanity, he took off his footwear and just watched her, not sure he could do this. She'd given her word so she'd ask no questions, but she'd know she'd see too deep, to things he kept hidden because they shamed him so utterly. No questions, she said again after an endless moment, and lifted up the edge of the blanket. Man and wolf both hungered for the simple beauty of her touch. He had no power, no will to resist. Standing, he crossed the carpet to slide into bed beside her, fully dressed. And when her arms came around him, when her fingers stroked into his hair, he buried his face in the curve of her neck and let the unexpected tenderness heal the wounds of the night. Sometime before dawn he slept. Mercy woke to the knowledge that she was wrapped around Riley like ivy, her face against his chest, her legs tangled with his, her hands under the t-shirt he was wearing beneath a khaki shirt. The blanket had been kicked off but she was toasty warm. He generated such luscious heat. Her cat purred, wanting to stay like this all day. So when the phone rang, she had a hard time extricating herself so she could grab it before he did. She succeeded only because the wolf was half asleep. We had contact from the kidnapper, Lucas said. He wants a meat. She snapped upright. It's mine. It's yours, Lucas agreed and gave her the details. I'll call Hawk, have some wolves meet you there. She decided not to mention she had one wolf right in front of her. Closing the phone, she ran her fingers over his stubbled jaw. Time to move, Kincaid. No words, but his muscles grew painfully rigid under her hands. He only relaxed half an hour later, when she continued to keep her promise to ask no questions. She didn't have to. She knew what haunted this powerful, proud male, though he'd never spoken of it, never even acknowledged it. And yet when the demons had become too bad, he'd come to her. It changed things, but that was something they didn't have the time to discuss. Not while Nash remained a hostage. The kidnapper was waiting for them in the shadowy depths of a half-demolished building on the outskirts of San Francisco. Early morning light whispered over the site, but somehow failed to soften the harsh lines of plascrete and metal. Everything about the place set Mercy's hackles to rising. Her eyes scanned the black plastic that floated where the windows should have been, giving the building even more of a sinister cast. Neither side of her liked the place, but it mattered little. She went in first. After a furious argument with a Riley who was back to his usual infuriating self. Human males underestimate females, she said. Even more than stupid changeling men. He could have a gun. I'm wearing a bulletproof vest. She touched the lightweight fabric. You go in. You're so mad you might tear off his face before he tells us anything. Riley's hand closed over her upper arm. Dark eyes ringed with amber. He deserves to have his face torn off. That won't tell us where Nash is, will it? She gritted her teeth. We haven't scented him anywhere near this building. If you kill this guy, we're back to square one. I don't like you going in there alone. There are 10 of you out here. You'll only be a couple of seconds behind me. How is that going in alone? She was nose to nose with him by now. Someone cleared their throat. Riley's growl scared them off. Don't pull any shit because you want to show off. Wait a second. She looked down then back up. Nope, I haven't grown a cock in the last few minutes. I have no need to prove whose is bigger. He leaned forward and bit her lip. Hard enough to sting. She'd have need him, but she needed his mangy wolf ass covering hers. Happy now, she muttered, wondering if anyone hadn't seen that blatant display of ownership. She and Riley were going to have a long talk after this was over. No, I won't be happy until I have you over my lap. She narrowed her eyes. Try it and we'll see who still has his balls. 2 minutes later, she walked into the dim room in one corner of the building, the windows half covered by old curtains rather than the ubiquitous black plastic. Some light crept in, but it was dull, as if the room swallowed all energy. The kidnapper had clearly chosen the location for that very reason. His skin shimmered with darkness, and he used the shadows to turn himself into an uncertain silhouette. But she was a cat, her vision acute. She saw his height, the way he held himself, and knew this man could draw blood with a single sharp move. I'm armed but I have no intention of attacking, were his first words. Mercy kept her hands in sight too. Excuse me if I don't take your word on it. His English was flawless, she thought, his accent too clean. Touché. That word fell far more naturally from his lips. My name is Bowen. A flash of perfect white teeth. Beau's what folks call me most of the time. Careless of you to lose your identity bracelet. The lynx was stronger than we thought. Another smile. Can I have it back? Charming, she thought. And he used his charm like a weapon. We're not here to be friends. Where's Nash and what do you want in exchange? Chapter 15. He's safe, Bowen said, no hint of sweat or panic in him. Mercy wasn't fooled. People could learn to regulate their breathing and bodily reactions if they practiced hard enough. I'd like to see him. After we talk. No charm now. So talk. Explain why you traumatized a young girl and stole her brother. Bowen blew out a breath, his hands fisting. It was meant to be a straight grab, no harm, no foul. The little one. We didn't realize she was outside until it was too late. What do you want? She asked again. To talk with the Dark River and Snowdancer alphas. There are things you need to know about the human alliance. And you want to tell us out of the goodness of your heart? I have a price on my head as of the night of Nash's kidnapping, he said, tone blunt. So do the rest of my men and women. We're a crack team, but there are only 10 of us. We need to ally ourselves to someone stronger, or we'll be dead in a matter of days. Mercy raised an eyebrow. I can tell you now your chances aren't high. Maybe it wasn't what a human negotiator would have said, but if Bowen knew anything about changelings, he'd know a less hostile response for a lie. Even now, she could feel the tidal wave of enmity from the men and women at her back. Cat or wolf, it didn't matter. They all wanted to tear Bowen into a million small pieces. Yeah, well, it's better than no chance. Bowen shrugged, shoulders moving with a fighter's grace under a battered leather synth jacket. Long as you continue to hold Nash, no one will talk to you. She made her tone as unyielding as his own. Non-negotiable. High cheekbones cut sharply against skin, the rich exotic shade of the finest caramel. He's sitting in room 10 at the Happy Inn down the street. Unconscious. No, Bowen actually looked shamefaced. We told him we'd gone back and grabbed his little sister so he'd cooperate. That explained why the rats and trackers had struck out. Hiding an angry lynx was a far different cry from holding a cooperative one. Nice. For the first time the mask of civility slipped. Hurt feelings can be mended. Dead men won't rise. Mercy didn't say anything. We'll wait while my people check out the inn. So they did. In silence. Riley's energy was a violent heat against her skin, but he held his position outside. 15 minutes later, there was a commotion at the front and then someone yelled out, "We have Nash." A pause. "And he wants blood." Mercy met Bowen's eyes, not dropping her guard. "You going to make trouble? I gave you back your boy, didn't I?" "True. So I could kill you right now." She wasn't as hostile as Riley, but she didn't like those who preyed on the weak. Nash and Willow had been under Dark River's care. They were hers as much as Tammy's cubs were. A claw slash to a few important spots, and you're out of our hair for good. Time stood still. Many miles from the chill standoff in that abandoned building, a slender male drove his car into the San Gabriel Mountains. His face was covered with sweat, his hands white-knuckled around the steering wheel. There were no embedded roads this far up, no way to put his small city-use car on automatic. Even if it had been possible, he wouldn't have chosen it. He needed to focus, to concentrate. His eyes saw only gravel and rock, an endless twisting pathway. Take the gun hidden in the trunk of your car. Drive to the enclave of artists on the edge of the Mojave. Kill as many of them as you can before the ammunition runs out. Remember, save one bullet for yourself. The car shuddered as it fell into a pothole, rattling his brain, throwing those whispering thoughts into chaos. He managed to get it out, but the tire was flat. Hitting the hover drive, he continued on his way. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, the gun would find its way into his hands, and men, women, and children would die. The compulsion crushed his mind, creating pinpricks of darkness behind his eyelids. Veins were starting to shatter, to bleed inside his skull. He couldn't go any farther. Twisting the wheel, he brought the car to a halt on the side of the rough mountain road. Then he got out, his gaze going immediately to the trunk. No. He willed himself to turn. That cliff, it was close enough. Holding his head in his hands, he forced himself to put one foot in front of the other. All he had to do was get to the edge. He didn't trust himself with the gun, but a fall would shatter his brain just as well. An hour after finding Nash, Mercy drove a still alive and uninjured Bowen out of the city, Indigo by her side. Bowen's hands were cuffed, his eyes blindfolded. Dorian had come out and used his toys to search for and remove 2 tracking devices. Bowen wasn't worried. I'd have been stupid if I hadn't had backup. Assuming his team was following, Mercy took him out through a number of back roads, making any pursuit highly visible to the large SUV following her vehicle. By the time they circled around and pulled into a deserted section of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area on the other side of the bridge, Bowen was very much alone. He held up his wrists when they removed the blindfold and let him get out. I think you guys can take me on even if I'm free. Mercy shifted in front of Riley as he exited the SUV and walked over. Don't irritate us, she said to Bowen. The Alliance man might be a tough son of a bitch, but Riley was a very experienced wolf in a cold rage. Something's going on that I clearly don't know about. The last time our people were abducted, one ended up dead and the other was tortured so badly most people thought she'd never recover, she said, letting him glimpse the leopard's need to hurt, to punish. So your chances of convincing us of anything are about 0. Bowen swore. Our intel was wrong. We'd never have done it this way if we'd known. Excuse me if I don't sympathize. Mercy could all but feel Riley's wolf, a hot, angry breath against her nape. It was as well that Dorian had left after doing the technical search. She didn't know if she'd have been able to keep Bowen safe from 2 men who continued to bear the vicious wounds of their sister's abductions. It didn't matter that Willow was young. It didn't even matter that she was female and Nash male. The girl had been traumatized by being unable to help her brother, her fledgling confidence dented. Mercy knew that if she wasn't handled right, little Willow would stop sneaking out at night. And for a changeling to curl up like that. She turned. Indigo. I've got him. Letting the snowdancer lieutenant escort Bowen into position, Mercy shifted to face Riley. I need you to deal. Amber glittered in his eyes but he didn't argue. I'll hang back. Tougher to rip the bastard's head off from here. With that, he took a position close to the outer perimeter of the protective semicircle around Lucas and Hawk. Of the 2 alphas, Lucas was the more calm. Part of it was because he was built that way, but mostly it was because he had a mate who grounded him. Hawk, on the other hand. His ice blue eyes were those of a wolf, his hair the silver gold of his pelt in his animal form. He looked exactly what he was, a predator uncontained by any loyalty save that to his pack. And by threatening Snowdancer's biggest ally, Bowen had threatened that pack. The wolf alpha's eyes met Mercy's as she came up beside Bowen, and the hairs on the back of her neck rose. Hawk was fully capable of killing Bowen then and there. Glancing at Lucas, she saw him spear the Alliance man with a green-eyed look that spoke of the panther within. You wanted to talk, so talk. Yeah, Lucas could put on the civilized act much better than Hawk, but when you got down to it, he was as lethal as the wolf. Why did you take one of us? Because Nash was in danger of being captured by the paramilitary arm of the Alliance. Seems like that would be a stupid move on the Alliance's part, Mercy said. After what happened to the last group that tried to come after one of us. Every single intruder had died, some falling prey to a sniper's rifle, the others to claws and teeth. You'd think so. Bowen's tone was bitter. The men who died in your territory were my friends, my fellow soldiers. You're not going to get sympathy here, Indigo said from her position to his right, her voice icy. I didn't expect any. Bowen held Lucas's gaze. They said a Shia line would help the Human Alliance take its rightful position in the world. We believed the rhetoric coming from the top. We thought they had only our future in mind. Leaves rustled in the mid-morning breeze, but even the gulls had gone quiet. Later, it was obvious we were inviting war. Bowen's voice grew rigid with withheld anger. That wasn't what I signed on for. The leadership seemed to realize that at the same time and we were told to go quiet. But 2 days ago we heard there'd been a decision to snatch Nash. He went to raise his cuffed hands but dropped them midway. Look at the back of my neck. Mercy nodded at Indigo to push down Bowen's collar, while she covered the snowdancer lieutenant. He's got a scar where the chip should be. We all got them, all the Alliance soldiers. Bowen lifted up his head. They told us it would help protect us. We figured it had to do with shielding us against Psi interference. Interest spiked in Mercy. Humans were the most vulnerable to Psi intrusions. Changelings had rock-solid natural shields. Did it? Never tested. He shrugged. One thing it did do was allow the leadership to track us. Like we were fucking GPS chipped. We found one of those things in Nash's house. That lynx had sharp claws, Bowen said. 3 went in but only one of us had the chip by that stage. So the Alliance would know who'd taken the boy, but not where. Nash saved us the trouble of removing the chip after the op. You telling us you flipped off the leadership? Hawk asked point blank. Yeah, pretty much. Why not just warn us so we could protect Nash? Mercy asked. 1. There wasn't enough time. 2. Because we wanted you aware of what we can do, came the unflinching response. We aren't easy prey, so don't mistake us for it. You're in our city, Lucas said softly. We'll get each and every one of you sooner or later. Name Lily ring a bell? Sloppy of you to leave her alone on watch at your hideout. Bowen froze. Hurt her and we'll strike back. Your people will die for no reason. Mercy guessed the intel about the hideout had come in while she was negotiating with Bowen. Likely, the Alliance people had given themselves away when they moved to protect Bowen's back. A fresh trail made all the difference. We don't kill innocents, Lucas said. But you're not exactly innocents. What the Alliance is becoming, Bowen's hands fisted. It's not anything we want to be a part of. And we're not the only ones. So you want us to allow a pit of vipers to set up house in our territory? Indigo's sarcastic voice. Bowen looked at her. Are you all the same? All the wolves? We believed in our leadership. We were betrayed. Now we're taking steps to move out of their shadow. And we're supposed to take your word for it, permitting you to ally yourself with two powerful groups? Mercy shook her head. Nice and opportunistic of you. Like vultures, Indigo added. The two women's eyes met. Mercy smiled. If we don't, Bowen said, white lines of strain around his mouth, they'll kill us through sheer strength and numbers. And I think both Snowdancer and Dark River would prefer that didn't happen, because if it does, then the militants take complete control of the Alliance. Mercy saw Lucas glance at Hawk and the wolf nod. Lucas clearly spoke for both of them when he said, Go back to your hideout and stay there. Don't cause any problems. The second you do, you're dead. Flat, cold words. We can't sit still, Bowen argued, shoulders tight with frustration. Hawk shrugged, and though he was in human form, it was as if the wolf had made the movement. So move. And die. You want to play power games with your leadership? Find another location. Lucas's face was pure alpha, no hint of give in him. We'll take care of the Alliance our way. Most humans would have backed down by now, hell so would most changelings, but Bowen held firm. We can help you, he said. We're strong, well-trained, and we know how to be loyal. His mouth twisted. At least until that loyalty is betrayed. Are you saying you're willing to swear allegiance to us? Lucas asked. Bowen nodded. If that's what it takes. The instant you do, Lucas continued, you fall out of enforcement jurisdiction. I could tear out your heart for breaking pack law, and they'd stand aside and let me. Forget about tearing out your heart, Hawk said casually. I'd rip you limb from limb. Riley spoke for the first time. I don't want anyone in our pack who thinks kidnapping a teenager out of his home is a good tactical move. Mercy knew the second Bowen realized that though two alphas stood in front of him, the real danger lay at his back. Riley was ready to gut him. The human male turned. We saved Nash from a far worse fate. Check all flights from Europe over the past 48 hours. I bet you'll find a hell of a lot of men and women coming in who walk like mercenaries. That new Alliance squad is still here. You're holding the information hostage? Riley again, sounding oh so calm. It had taken her 6 months of working with him before she'd realized the calmer he got, the angrier he was. I don't have it, Bowen responded. One thing humans have gotten very good at over the years is blending in. The Alliance team is in the city, that's all I know. My contact at HQ tells me they also have a new target, but we don't know who or what. Mercy, Lucas said. Debrief and take him back to his people. To Bowen he said, as far as we're concerned, you're still the enemy. You prove us wrong, fine. But until then, you so much as lift a weapon in this city, we'll take you out. In the San Gabriel Mountains, another struggle continued to take place under an unforgiving sun. The slender Psy male was almost to the edge of the cliff when he fell. His knees bled as the gravel shredded his pants, but he barely felt the pain. His head was about to explode. A trickle of liquid slid from his nose, and when he touched it, his fingertip came away stained red. The compulsion didn't like being denied. Determined, he tried to get up. His body refused. It hurt. Everything hurt. But he had to get to the edge. So he pitched himself forward and started to crawl. A few more meters and he could end this without doing that which should never be done. He was Psy. He couldn't pick up a gun and mow down innocent men and women. Inside his mind, the compulsion slammed up painfully against the solid wall of silence. His nose bled faster. When he heard a wolf's howl on the breeze, he realized he might not have to make it to the edge. Perhaps nature would end this for him. Mercy drove a still angry Riley back to the cabin so he could head up to the den. You're making my teeth ache. The wolf in the passenger seat stared at her out of human eyes. No questions even now? Surprised he'd brought it up, she shrugged. Some promises you don't even think of breaking. He trusted her with his pain last night, and she knew just how difficult that kind of trust was for him. The leopard had been startled by it. But that startlement was growing into something stronger, something that threatened the distance she was trying to keep. Riley opened his mouth as if to reply when something beeped into the silence. Taking out his cell phone, he checked the message and swore. She tore her mind away from the implications of the previous night. Because she'd let him in. And that too was a rare kind of trust. What? Nothing. Just kids being stupid. He stuck the phone back into his pocket. I have to go bust some heads up at the den. Why do you have to be the one to hand out punishment? Because the kids got caught hatching a plan to toilet paper John. Not John's home. John. He sounded like he had a spike being driven into his eyeballs. And since I'm the Dark River liaison, Judd finds it highly amusing to make me deal with it. Mercy moaned. Oh God. John had been adopted into Dark River by Clay and Tally a few months back. He'd not only fit right in, he'd become the undisputed leader of his age group, and John wasn't changeling, which said something about his skills. John probably did something first. And didn't get caught. Riley shook his head. I wish this lot would have been better at hiding their tracks. His eyes glimmered amber when he glanced at her. Where are the South Americans? Her leopard bared its teeth in a soundless growl at the unwelcome change in topic. Don't know. Don't care. Though she had every intention of making her opinion of the pair clear to her grandmother. And those two have nothing to do with whether or not we share skin privileges. Riley snorted. Please. Your grandmother threw them at you because there's a high chance your mate will be a dominant leopard. What's that to you? It came out without thought, and she wasn't sure if it was a warning or a dare. His phone beeped again before he could answer. Riley checked it with a grimace. You'll have to come up with me. Hey, wolves are yours to deal with. She meant to have a hard chat with Eduardo and Joaquin during that time. No one was going to push her into a situation she didn't choose. I have enough. They had John duct taped to a tree. Judd just sprung him, but he was found with a suspicious amount of itching powder in his pockets. And several of the wolf juveniles have been squirming for hours. Mercy wanted to beat herself with the blunt object. Please God, kill me now. I'd rather work out my frustration by stripping you naked and letting you use those claws on me. And that quickly all she wanted to do was to crawl all over him. Chapter 16. At a quiet meeting room in the sunken city of Venice, 4 women and 5 men sat around a long dark table. Outside the windows situated flush against the dome that kept the city and its inhabitants from drowning, water lapped in a gentle blue-green wash. But inside the quiet was sharp, spiked with the knife edge of tension. 2 of the chairs around the table lay empty. Orion and Douglas had both walked away during the discussion of the latest operation, unwilling and unable to see the long-range nature of the plans they'd helped develop. The chairman was frustrated by their lack of vision, but then perhaps it was better they were gone. Orion in particular had been vociferous in her opposition to the Nash-Baker operation. She'd undoubtedly have used this opportunity to push for a less militant approach. Bowen's team has gone under, the chairman told the others. But they're not our primary concern. I sent the information about the target with a brand new team. Yet Bowen and his people managed to acquire and act on that information before the others even arrived in the city. The leak, could it be Orion? Another man asked. She was vocal about her disagreement. No, a third man responded. She's a woman of her word. I've had enough business dealings with her to appreciate that. Douglas. Too weak, one of the women murmured. He was on the board because he had money, not balls. Some of the men grimaced, but the chairman nodded. Which means it's either one of us, or there's a leak in our offices. I intend to plug that leak. A statement that carried the menacing darkness of a threat. Go ahead. This came from the same woman who'd spoken earlier. But don't try to play the big man. A disdainful sniff. You may have delusions of grandeur, but this is a group effort. If you can't understand that, you shouldn't be here. The chairman blinked, taken by surprise, though he hid it well. Of course. I'd never presume otherwise. But you did ask me to be in charge of security matters. It's my job to close the breach. And he would close it. No one was going to stand in the way of his vision. By the time this was over, humanity would rule. And see him as their god. Even if he had to paint the streets with Psy and changeling blood. Chapter 17. The situation in the Snowdancer den turned out not to be as bad as Mercy had feared. Lucas had come up with Hawk so they could discuss the alliance matter more in depth. And Sasha had accompanied him for reasons of her own. As a result, a suitably chastened John was sitting in the brig when they got back. Why does he look like he swallowed raw eggs? Mercy asked Sasha, after she found her alphas made in front of said brig. One cell held wolf juveniles, the other John. Now that she thought about it, every single miscreant looked prune-faced. What did you do to all of them? Sasha gave her a beatific smile as they walked out into the corridor and began to head south. They had to say one nice thing about each other. John had to say a nice thing about every single wolf he dusted with that powder. Mercy's leopard grinned. I like this new evil side of you. The nature of Sasha's gift meant she couldn't hurt anyone without hurting along with that person. That didn't mean her spine wasn't forged out of unadulterated steel. I had wild monkey sex with Riley. The speed with which it came out told her. Her subconscious had simply been waiting for the chance. Sasha almost tripped over her own feet. Oh. A pause as she glanced around the corridor and lowered her voice. Lucas mentioned it, but... Really? You and Riley? Oh yeah. Mercy rubbed her face. I can't believe I just told you. It means I'm thinking of doing it again. Was it good? Sasha slapped a hand over her mouth, cardinal eyes wide with mortification. I've been living too long with cats. That was a horribly nosy question. It was fantastic, Mercy answered. Fan-fucking-tastic. I want more. It's making me insane. What's stopping you from? Aside from the fact that he's a wolf? She raised an eyebrow. And I'm a cat? There's all sorts of wrong there. Mercy, don't try and snow me. Changelings aren't animals. You're human too. And there's nothing wrong with a strong woman like you finding Riley attractive. Mercy reached up to redo her ponytail. You know how predatory changeling men are. But now she knew he was more than that. She'd felt the depth of his hurt, seen a glimmer of a heart so strong, it made the leopard hunger to be invited in. You're hardly a cream puff. Sasha's expression filled with mischief. I don't think Riley's going to know what hit him. A shiver sizzled down her spine even as she grinned at Sasha's comment. Glancing instinctively to the right, she saw Riley heading out from the area where the boys were contained. Finished. This time. He looked at Sasha. They're calling you the devil incarnate. Smile-wide, Sasha dusted off her hands. My work here is done. She glanced at her watch. I have to go see Toby, she said, mentioning Jed's nephew. And then I'd better go rescue Hawk and Lucas from each other. You two going to sit in on this meeting? I might swing by, see if they need us for anything, Mercy said. After that, I'm gonna go for a long run, clear my head. There was too much crap clogging her up. The human alliance going suddenly psychotic, juveniles acting up now of all times, and this damn unquenchable thirst for Riley the Wall Kincaid. They'd been antagonists for so long, the increasing complexity of her feelings for him kept catching her unawares. Riley didn't say anything as he accompanied her to Hawk's office, which didn't surprise her. The wolf could be very quiet when he was thinking, and strange as it was, she'd come to be comfortable with his silences, because Riley never stopped being there. His focus as absolute as always. Hawk was picking up a call as they walked in. Mercy leaned over the back of Lucas's chair, intending to ask if he needed her to do anything before she headed down, but Hawk swore sailor harsh before she could get a word out. She looked up to find his face a mask of anger and, oddly, pity. Send it through, he said, and flicked on the comm panel to their left. The screen filled with the image of a golden blonde snowdancer soldier. We found him collapsed on the edge of the cliff. Looks like he was trying to crawl over it. Hold on. The soldier turned his cell phone so they could see the rough tent that had been rigged a few feet away. Getting closer, he lifted the edge of the canvas to reveal the male who lay unconscious inside. He's covered in blood, and as far as we can tell he's continuing to bleed from the nose and ears. A pause. Jem says it looks like the fine veins in his eyes are starting to go as well. We don't have the resources to treat him. I've called an evac unit, but I don't think it'll get him to a hospital in time. Anything to tell us who he is? Hawk asked. Full ID in the pocket, Samuel Rain, a robotics expert employed at Psion Research. That's a Psi company, Mercy muttered. He Psi. Doesn't have the smell, was the response. But from the density of his bones I'd say so. One more thing. He had a loaded semi-automatic in the trunk of his car. Lucas tapped a finger on the arm of his chair. We can get word to someone who might be able to get him out of there in time. Get him directly to Psi Medics. The snowdancer Alpha didn't hesitate. Do it. Jesus, what a way to freaking die. Mercy was already pulling out her cell phone, knowing exactly who Lucas was talking about. Anthony Kariakis knew a very, very fast teleporter. What are his precise coordinates? Heading out of the office soon as she had that info, she made the call to Faith in private. Riley met her eyes as she re-entered. Still keeping secrets? Of course. Don't tell me you share everything. She returned her attention to the comm panel. What would drive a Psy to throw himself off a cliff? He probably didn't want to use the gun, Riley said with quiet pragmatism. Lucas shoved a hand through his hair. If this kind of thing is the outer edge, what's going to happen when the Psynet really fractures? Hell on earth, Hawk said, eyes on the screen. Whoa. It came from the soldier on the cliff. He's gone. He switched the camera to show the empty spot where the body had lain. Fuck, that teleporter must be good to do it from a distance. Mercy agreed. She'd rarely seen a teleporter in action, but Sasha had told her that most needed contact with their passenger. Well, she said after the comm screen cleared, I guess that's that. Do you think, Hawk murmured, those pale wolf eyes contemplative, they'd do the same for us if we were lying injured and bleeding in front of them? Depends on the individual Psy, Mercy answered, having some idea of how much Hawk despised most of the psychic race. Lucky for this guy we aren't the vicious animals the council makes us out to be. Riley stirred beside her. You need us the rest of the day? It was Lucas who answered. No. Go. Play. Hawk's grim look turned wolf-wicked as Mercy narrowed her eyes at her alpha and left the room. She felt Riley exit beside her, though he didn't say a word until they were back in the main corridors. I guess the secret's out. What are you talking about? She said, the devil in her taking over. Seeing that bloody broken body had been the final straw. She needed to decompress. And what better way than by teasing Riley? You, he said, his voice dropping as she stopped and turned to face him. And me. Her nipples hardened to aching points, but she made her expression dismissive. Don't flatter yourself. She shoved her hands into the back pockets of her jeans and rocked back on her heels, decision made. Excitement was a taut bow inside her as she said, I had an itch. You scratched it. End of story. A low growl that made her thighs clench, but she smiled and wiggled her fingers. See ya later, Wolfie. Riley was about to stalk after her when he belatedly realized he was no longer alone. Scenting the air, he found out how the intruder had snuck in under his defenses. His wolf didn't consider his younger sister any kind of a threat. Bren, don't say a word. Brenna took one look at Riley's face and bit back a laugh. Not fast enough. Her oldest brother turned to her with that look. The one that made everyone behave. But this time she was laughing too hard to hold it in any longer. Riley just waited until she'd gotten it out of her system before raising an eyebrow. You and Mercy. I love it. Silence. She sniggered. You wanted Little Miss Submissive, and you got a Dark River Sentinel. Her giggles started again, deep in her throat. Brenna, I'm still your eldest brother. And I made it to a big bad sigh. She put on her best annoying little sister voice. Plus you know you love me. I know that right now. I wish I had some duct tape to put over your mouth. Oh, that was interesting. Nobody really ever got to Riley. She knew he loved her to pieces, but even she had to prod and poke at him for a really long time before she got a reaction. Mercy and Riley sitting in a tree. "SSI," she shrieked as he picked her up, threw her over his shoulder, and strode toward her quarters. Her laughter came unbidden. She was giddy with delight. Riley had always been mature, contained, but he'd also had a sense of quiet humor. He was the kind of man children loved because he was both patient and open. But he'd changed after her abduction, withdrawn all that warmth, become so hard that nothing seemed to reach him. She hated that. And she loved Mercy for refusing to allow Riley to be the stranger he'd turned into. Her nostrils flared at the familiar scent of ice, laced with something that was uniquely Judd. I assume you have a reason for manhandling my mate? Cool words, but his amusement was apparent. Riley likes Mercy, she stage whispered, trying to twist around to look at her mate. But she told him that oomph. Riley set her on her feet without warning. She swayed, but Judd's hands on her hips kept her upright. Pushing her hair off her face, she leaned into her sexy Psy mate and smirked at Riley. So, Judd. Riley ignored her. You're obviously not interesting enough for my sister. She's got way too much time to poke her nose into other people's business. Judd wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin on her hair. I'm more interested in you and Mercy. Growling, Riley actually growled. Her big brother turned on his heel and left. Brenna waited until he was out of hearing distance to say, I hope Mercy puts him through the ringer and brings him out whole on the other side. He was changed by your abduction. He'll never be who he was before. I know. She rubbed her cheek against his arm. But I want him to learn to be happy again. A pause. She waited, knowing her mate well enough to understand he was thinking things through. He was so logical that it delighted her each time he let go. And he had a habit of doing that in bed. Which reminded her, she needed to replace the iron headboard that had buckled under the force of his telekinesis last night. At least it had held up better than the wooden stuff. Maybe she should start thinking about futons. Your brother is used to being in charge, Jed said at last. So is Mercy. Good. Why? God, but she loved his honesty, his willingness to show her everything he was. Riley, she said, turning to nuzzle at his throat, has this image of a submissive female he'll be able to pamper and protect, but he'd never be able to truly be who he is with that woman. She shook her head. He needs someone strong enough, tough enough, to refuse to put up with those walls he uses to keep everyone at a distance. Even if he was too stubborn to see it. After waving at Riley, Mercy took off at the speed of light. It didn't matter that Brenna had distracted him. She knew he'd come after her. She'd read the intent loud and clear on his face, in his scent. It was why she'd pushed at him that way, picking at his possessive territorial instincts she'd known would be running high after the events of the previous 48 hours. This time he wouldn't be satisfied by anything other than a hard, sweaty bout of either raw sex or violence. And she knew very well which he'd choose. Her leopard smiled at the challenge, even as the feminine core of her tightened, readying itself in expectation. Part of her wondered what the hell she was doing. The rest of her didn't care. Smile edged with excitement, she stayed in human form as she headed out of the white zone, the safe area around the snowdancer den, and into the huge tract of land beyond. This area wasn't patrolled, being pincered between the white zone and the heavily guarded perimeter. It was the zone where the juvenile and adult wolves felt free to hunt, run, play. Her legs jumped over a fallen log without her conscious command, her body moving with a rhythm that could come only from being changeling. She was fast, faster than any other female in Dark River, but she could feel him gaining on her, so she pushed and went impossibly faster. If the wolf wanted her, he'd have to catch her. Deep in her primal brain she knew what she was doing. Dominant leopard women never came easily into a lover's arms. They tested their chosen male, made him prove he was capable of handling all the female had to give, more that he was willing to fight to get it. But Mercy wasn't ready to think about the implications of her challenge. All she knew was that this was the most exhilarating game of her life. She could scent Riley in the breeze as he ran behind her, feel the sheer weight of his intent. The wolf thought he had her, but she wasn't a leopard for nothing. Not slowing down, she jumped onto a tree trunk, hooking herself with her claws. Climbing up with the feline grace built into her genes, she pulled herself up onto a branch, and quickly made her way to the end, to jump onto the next tree. And the next. There would be no trail below, nothing to tell him where she'd gone. Well, except for her scent. But he'd have to be fast to catch it. Because her cat was cunning. She'd circled back on him, was going toward him as he ran her way. It would confuse the trail, make him head in one direction while she went in the other. And that was exactly what happened a few minutes later as he passed under her. Disappointment cut through her, a hot, biting wound. She hadn't actually wanted him to fail. If she made it to the den before him, then she won, and though she might accept him back into her bed again, it would never be the same. Making a face, telling herself she wasn't that upset. Liar, liar. She continued through the trees. 100 meters on, she realized she couldn't make a direct leap from tree to tree. Since Riley was way over in the wrong direction, she jumped off the branch and came to a crouching, cat-like landing on the small clearing below. A familiar hand closed around her throat from behind an instant later, and she found herself hauled up against a firm, gorgeously male chest. His free arm clamping across her body to immobilize her own arms. Heat against her ear. The possessive brush of lips that she wanted to feel on every inch of her skin. Gotcha! She reacted on instinct, kicking backward with her legs as she attempted to wrench her body loose. All that got her was a grunt and some rough swearing before she was pressed front first to a tree trunk, her hands manacled behind her back, her shoulders immobilized by his arm, and her legs held in place by heavy male thighs. He'd left her just enough leeway that she could turn her head. Both of them were breathing hard, their animals at the forefront, but she was very aware of one thing. Through it all, Riley had taken every care not to hurt her. Even now he was pressing into her with a fraction less strength than he should have done if he really wanted to keep her contained. Test not only passed but aced. Because this was a game. Hurting your partner wasn't the aim. Riley. Yeah. He didn't break his hold even as he pressed closer, his erection insistent against her lower back. The tiny hairs on her body shivered in reaction. I think you're sexy. Riley narrowed his eyes at Mercy's teasing comment. I'm not trusting a word that comes out of that pretty mouth until you acknowledge my dominance. If I do, will you use your pretty mouth to lick me between my legs? Christ almighty. Mercy, I'm this close to tearing off your pants and just mounting you. The lush tang of feminine arousal had flirted with the air since the moment he put his hand on her, but now it blanketed everything around them. The wolf rose to the surface, lifting his arm off her shoulders, but pressing his chest against her back. He ran his lips over the shell of her ear. Or is that what you want?